In this video, we're learning about biodiversity, but more specifically, species diversity. So we'll cover what biodiversity is, the three main levels of biodiversity, and also the difference between species richness and species evenness. To begin, let's look at what biodiversity is. The term biodiversity refers to the variety of living organisms in an area. This variation in organisms can exist in different forms though, and can be either interspecific variation or intraspecific variation. Interspecific variation is the variation between different species. For example, all the differences between pigs and owls, like having wings and talons or forelegs with hooves. Intraspecific variation, on the other hand, refers to the variation between individuals of the same species, like how humans have different natural hair colours and heights. There are a few key definitions associated with biodiversity that you need to know though. One term you'll hear a lot is species, and we can define it as a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. For instance, these two salmon are the same species because they can reproduce, and then their offspring can also reproduce. The next really common term is ecosystem, and this refers to a self-contained community of interacting organisms and their environment. So here, the interacting community accounts for all the living factors, like the plants and animals, and the environment accounts for all the non-living factors, like water, soil, sunlight, and air, and they all form part of the same ecosystem. Community then is another useful term, which describes all the living organisms of different species found in an ecosystem at a given time. So in this ecosystem, the tree, bushes, bear, algae, and fish all make up the biological community. Then, on top of that, we've got habitat, which refers to the place where an organism lives within an ecosystem. So for our salmon, its habitat is the lake that it lives in. The final term you'll hear a lot is niche. This one's a bit harder to understand, but basically it describes an organism's role in an ecosystem. So that includes both how it interacts with other organisms and also how it obtains energy. So this salmon's niche includes where it lives in the river, what it eats, like worms and other small animals, what eats it, like the bear or other large animals, who it competes with, so the other fish that eat the same food, and also how it affects the ecosystem, like by cycling nutrients in the water. Okay, so at this point, let's look at the three main levels of biodiversity. And we can think of the different levels of biodiversity as existing on a scale from large scale to small scale. If we order them from largest to smallest, they are ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and then genetic diversity. First, ecosystem diversity, which is sometimes called habitat diversity, refers to the variety of habitats in an area. As an example here, the Amazon rainforest contains tropical rainforests, wetlands, and river systems, which are each different habitats supporting different communities of organisms. Then at a slightly smaller scale, we have species diversity, which describes both the number of different species and the number of individuals within each species. For example, coral reefs often have a high species diversity, with hundreds of species of fish, corals, and invertebrates living together in a single area. Then, at the smallest scale, we have genetic diversity, which refers to the variation in alleles within a species. And alleles are just different versions of a gene. For example, different breeds of domestic dogs, from Great Danes to Chihuahuas, show genetic diversity, but are all the same species. And some of this genetic diversity is caused by their different alleles. Okay, so at this point, let's focus specifically on species diversity and look at the difference between species richness and species evenness, which are the two key components of species diversity. Starting with species richness, this is simply the number of different species in a habitat. So if this habitat has 8 different species, and this habitat has only 3 different species, the first habitat has a higher species richness, and the second one has a lower species richness.